Hi. If you are watching this video, you probably know by now that my name is Cece Bell, and I have been doing in-depth studies of each chapter of my graphic novel about deafness called Deafo. And today we would have been doing chapter 11, but that feels kind of frivolous today based on everything that's been going on in the past couple of weeks. So while this video will be about deafness, it will also be about everything that's been going on in the past couple of weeks. So basically, what I'm referring to are the protests that have been happening. And what people are protesting is the death of a Black American man, George Floyd, at the hands of police officers. And people are not just protesting that, but they're also protesting the deaths before George Floyd and some after due to police brutality, but also just people in general. These are protests against racism, and they're very important protests. These protests are shining a harsh light on the brutalities and the injustices that Black citizens of this country face daily. This spotlight is very important. We all need to look more closely at these injustices, especially white people like myself. Together, we need to protest them and strive for change and talk about them. We need to change. And I realize with some real shame that I have not been paying as close enough attention to things like this as I should. And I really hope that I can remedy this, and making this video is maybe a start. So we'll talk about deafness for a little bit. One of the most difficult things about being a deaf person, perhaps the most difficult thing, is the problems that we have communicating. It's as simple as that. The ease with which hearing people communicate is something that I think they take for granted. But it's just easy. It's not easy for deaf people. So here's a story from my own life. Some time ago, I was at a grocery store, and I was putting groceries down on the conveyor belt, and I was at one end of the conveyor belt, and the cashier, a woman, was at the other end. I was busy looking down, putting groceries on the conveyor belt, and I did not realize that the cashier was asking me questions. Didn't know I was being talked to, didn't hear, wasn't paying attention. By the time I did realize that she had been talking to me and asking me questions that I wasn't responding to, she was extremely angry. And this is something that happens a lot to deaf people. It's very frustrating, but sometimes when we don't hear what other people are saying, those other people, usually hearing people, get very, very angry. They do not like the fact that we are not hearing them, and that makes them mad. They lose their patience. They think that we're not paying attention, and it's not that, we're not hearing them. So her response to me, not hearing her and not responding properly to her question, was anger, and she was practically spitting words at me. When I am faced with anger like this, I tend to panic, and when I go into panic mode, I lose all of my lip reading skills. And so that just makes it worse. I can't understand people times 100, and I couldn't understand the cashier at all at this point. So the interaction got worse and worse, and she got angrier and angrier. And I was so upset that I ran out of the grocery store with my groceries, but without my credit card and without my receipt. The cashier chased me out the store, and in the middle of the parking lot, flung my credit card and receipt in my face and spat at me. "You forgot these." I was so upset that after I unloaded my groceries into my car, I sat in my car and cried and cried. And I was partly crying because I was angry at the woman, but I was also crying because I was ashamed, and what I was ashamed of was myself. I was also angry at myself for not simply saying the words, "I am deaf." I was close to 40. I think I was 40 at that point, and I had never been able to say those words. So that anger, that shame that I felt at that moment, and that need to communicate the fact at long last, that need to say, "I am deaf," is what fueled me to write this book. This book exists because of that interaction. So, why am I telling you this story? Well, I want you to imagine that story differently. Imagine if I had been a deaf black person and that cashier was a police officer. I know that's a little bit of a stretch, but bear with me. So we've already clearly seen that some, not all, but some police officers treat black people differently because of deep systemic racism. Assumptions are made. That's a big part of it. Just assumptions are made going into a situation, and they just come in thinking a certain way, and often that certain way is simply not true. But anyway, what if a black person who is being interrogated by a policeman is also deaf? What if that deaf person doesn't understand an officer? What if that deaf black person does not hear the officer? What if he doesn't respond because he doesn't hear? Would that be perceived as resisting arrest? And what if the black deaf person uses sign language as an attempt to communicate, and those signs are assumed to be gang signs? These things have actually happened to black deaf people, and the results have been horrifying. They have been harmed as a result. So think about the panic that I described at the grocery store, and that was in a safe place, in a safe situation. But I still panicked, and in that panic, my lip reading skills went out the window. So imagine the panic a deaf black person might feel if he or she saw an officer with a gun and was having that much trouble communicating. I've been pulled over a time or two for traffic violations, and the first thing I always think of when I'm sitting there waiting for the officer to talk to me is, will I be able to read him or her? The panic begins immediately. But the big difference here is I'm a deaf white woman. I am not a deaf black man or a deaf black woman. And I can only imagine that fear based on my own experiences. But what a luxury to only have to imagine it. There are so many people living with that reality. So bad things have happened to deaf black people due to miscommunication with police officers, and to many other black people with all kinds of disabilities too. So let's remember all of our Black friends and neighbors and citizens of this country who are also disabled, and let's remember them in conversations about police reform. Officers must be trained to recognize disabilities amongst all the people they serve and strive to learn better communication skills as well. And this is especially true with Black people with disabilities of any kind. So officers need more training with communication and patience and understanding. Black lives really do matter. Thank you so much for listening, and join me in what I hope will be some really good and lasting changes. Thank you. Bye.